Hello everyone. We will continue with our session on risk management or more precisely supply chain or supply risk management. So in the last session, we have discussed risk management framework. Risk management framework can be considered as a guideline, to address the risks in any scenario. So we have seen the risk management framework is comprised of risk identification, where we will try to categorize the risk. We would go for risk assessment, which can be done in a qualitative or quantitative manner, and risk mitigation. So in today's session, we will try to focus on risk identification. Okay, so what is the importance of risk identification and why we need to categorize? And do we have some schemes, to categorize those risks? Right. So risk identification, it ensures a common understanding of all categories of risks. Okay. So when we talk about addressing risk, for any organization, right, it is easier said than done to get the exhaustive list of risks. What are those risks? Mostly companies, like, they if this activity has to be done in a cross functional manner, right? Because this risks, the sources of risk can be originating from anywhere, any part of the business, or it can be outside the business. So if we will be able to categorize the risk, that will ensure a common understanding, right? If we are talking about a business setting, it will be common understanding in that organization about the categories of risk. If we will talk about supply chain, like, if we will have a categories of supply risk, it would help an organization to understand, what are the types of risk, what are the sources of risk, right? And can we categorize with one scheme, either, these two three risks are of similar nature, either the sources of this risks are same, or the impact of this two three risks are similar in nature, so that we can devise the mitigation plans towards those categories. So this is one of the reason why, to start with analyzing or managing risk identification and categorization is very important. It also helps us in evaluating relative risk severity and its implication. Okay, so the risk categories affect various business units or functions differently, right? As we have seen in the last session, many examples, the source or the reason of risk can be fire, but we have seen, it has impacted very differently, to the organizations or the supply chain. Okay, it might be like, due to many reasons, right, that risky event, the occurrence of risky event, and the exposure of risky event. So if risky event exposure is long, obviously the impact would also be high, right? So a particular risk, a particular category of risk impact different business unit, different supply chain entities, different functions very differently. So it is very important first to understand, the categories of risk. It also set as basis for risk assessment and risk mitigation. Okay, if we would understand, the categories of risk, if we would understand the sources of those categories, we can, divert the resources, for a particular mitigation plan. The idea behind that would be, can we have a mitigation plan which can address some particular type of category of risk or more than one risk, by having same strategy. This is just an one example, like, why we need to categorize the risk. So we need a clear and robust framework to categorize the risk. So what are the different frameworks available to us? We have seen, like, there are different bases. For example, degree of controllability can be one, like, whether we can control the uncertain event, or can we control the risky event, right? Depending on that, can we classify the risk. Another category can be internal risk and external risk. Now, when we talk about internal risk and external risk, the question comes, internal to what? Are we talking about internal to a firm or organization, right? There can be another thing. It can be internal to supply chain, right? Or external to organization, right? Or external to supply chain. So many companies also try to categorize the risk based on normal business risk versus disruption risk. Disruption risk, like, which are the disruptive events, like, natural disaster, terrorist attack, which are not at all known. They are complete unknown and they are not controllable at all. So if we will have, some kind of scheme, it is very it will be very easy uh, to position different categories of for risk under this broad category. So when we talk about degree of controllability, right? So you can see this thing with Kaplan and Mike's paper, where they have uh, in an organization, how this risk is perceived in general, right? So this category can be adopted by any organization or any supply chain, right, to identify and categorize risk, right? So first category is known knowns, right? So what do we mean by this known known, right? I can say that I can measure the probability of occurrence. That means I know that event would occur and its impact, right? So, for example, like, any error is happening in the routine and repetitive tasks within an organization, or if it is a employee misconduct or misbehavior, or, employee doesn't know how to do the things, we know that, there are chance, something can go wrong, and if that thing can go wrong, how it would impact. Fail to perform standardized or predictable processes. Predictable, that's why it's known. So the first category is known known. So we can also say that because this is known known, we can say this is a preventable risks, right? So one can now place all such kind of risks under known knowns, preventable risks. For example, when we talk about supply risk, right? Well, if if any supplier is supplying defective products, right? It can be like, due to chance, or it can be due to, like, error at, or it is like, a man-made error happening at the supplier premises, right? But we can predict, we always, like, when the quality checks happen, we always predict, like, 1 to 2% of defects are always there, and we can control it, right? So we can have strategies and ways to have reduce those defects. Those are preventable risks. So this can be one category. Now you see that, once we have, some scheme, it is easy, to position your type of risk within each category, right? Now second is known unknowns. What is known unknowns, right? So here, ability to reduce the likelihood and impact, so here we can have or we can try to reduce the impact, right? So it is definitely known that the probability, we cannot eliminate the probability of occurrence, like, the event would occur or not occur, that is unknown, right? But we know the impact, and can we reduce the impact, right? So for example, like, many a times companies, they, like, why it is strategy execution, right? Many a times companies voluntarily take risk, right? Let's open up a new plant in new market, or altogether different country, right? So this is a kind of a risk. They know that, there is a risky situation there, so but how this can result in some adverse impact, but how we can reduce the impact. So sometimes voluntarily take on risk so that they can generate high returns from strategy. The intention of taking this risk is definitely to have more returns from strategy, uh, but it also is a risky affair. So but that risk, the impact of risk, is not known, but we can reduce it, we can try to reduce the risk. So these are the known unknowns, right? And these are also called strategy risk by this Kaplan and Mikes. The third category they have categorized as unknown unknowns. So here, we cannot estimate or not even aware of such event, right? And that could just jeopardize the company's strategy survival, right? So if we want to, say, we can say it as external risk, which is not in the control of any organization. It can be external, and it is uncontrollable. We cannot control those activities, right? The natural disasters will fall under this category, right? So when we talk about supply management, right? So what is natural disaster? If any earthquake or cyclone would happen at the supplier premises, right? And it would certainly disrupt the supply, right? The the buyers, the manufacturers, or the downstream supply chain entities would not be able to get the supply on time because of such natural disasters. So that category falls under unknown unknowns. So this is one kind of category scheme of categorization to reduce the to address the risk. There can be another one which is very simple. The companies can say that would like to divide the risk is internal and external, right? When we say that addressing the risk at organization level, we can say that the all the risk types of risk which are internal to firm, right? Internal, how we manage inventory, how we manage capacity, forecasting, any information systems like cyber security and all, right? Or any delays which are happening because of the inflexible manufacturing, or or due to human resources, right? So the risk of the skill mismatch, for in the service sector. So these are all internal to firm, right? But many a times, we would like to categorize the risk. If we will talk about supply chain perspective, we would like to say that uh, the risk category internal to supply chain, right? What does this mean? That along with the risk internal to firm, the risk originating from the supply side of supply chain and from the customer side of supply chain, that is called internal to supply chain, right? And the next category can be external to supply chain or even external to an organization, like natural disaster, climate change, pandemic, economic risk, like the oil supply volatility, oil prices volatility, right? That that might not go as a direct material to an organization or not as a direct supply, but the repercussions, the effect, the impact can be realized in other forms. Societal risk, like there can be reputational risk, terrorism and security. So societal risk, like these days, like all companies are very much worried about ESG, sustainability, reputation, reputation risk. For example, if in context of supply chain, like if a supplier is employing child labor, or they are not following the safety considerations, right? That can result in disaster. So that can hamper the reputation of the manufacturer or retailer who is getting supply from such supplier, right? So such kind of risks can be there, which is not within the organization, right? This is external to organization, but it really impacts, right? It impacts the reputation of, the retailer. And, terrorism and security, this we have all observed, like, day in, day out, how it disrupts the whole supply chain and organization, right? So when we say internal to firm, it can be along with, the other inventory capacity, this thing. It can be like process oriented or control oriented management and value adding activities, and rule systems which govern how firm controls the processes. So this can be the internal to firm, right? And when we talk about internal to supply chain, right, as I've said, supply and demand, but if we will go little more in detail, so what kind of risk categories we could see in supply chain is uh, the risk coming from supply management, right? What kind of risk we would see from the supply side of supply chain is like, first is like, we can view delay related risks, right? Now this delay can happen, either supply is not having sufficient capacity, or supply does not have flexible capacity, supplier is not able to supply good quality products. That's why, some defects have happened and it has delayed it, right? So there can be many reasons, and it can be procurement related, from where we are procuring, what is the price, the acquisition price. We have already discussed acquisition price. What is the acquisition price? Is it fluctuating? Is it changing over time? Does it involve global purchasing? That means, do we have, the exchange rate issues, like, exchange rate related risks? So all this risks will come under the procurement, right? How we are acquiring the product? Are we acquiring the product from single supplier? The moment we go for single supplier, we are kind of exposing to more risk, right? So this is comes under in the supply chain. They can be a supply chain. Then information systems and management, this can be, uh, there can be risk in, like, information sharing, or like, lack of information sharing. It can be risk due to information system. It can be risk due to cyber related issues among supply chain, right? There can be risk in the demand side, the customer side of supply chain, like when we are not able to forecast the demand properly. There are forecast related risk. What would happen if, forecast risk will be there? We can either over forecast, or we can either under forecast, or we can say that overestimation of demand, underestimation of demand, that might result in either stock out situation, the risk of stock out inventory, or it can be their risk of understock, like, there was a huge scope but we couldn't predict the demand, right? And this is understock. There can be risks of receivables, like, we have sold the product, but, the receivables, the payments are not coming. So there are definitely financial risk, but this is there in the supply chain environment because payments are not received on time. There are intellectual property. So many a times in supply chain, there are strategic partnerships, like, the companies, they involve the suppliers in R&D, right? So then, sometimes there are risk of, like, uh, who would own the intellectual property, who would own the patents, like, who will have the rights of the patents, like, some infringements happening. So all these issues, they are the risk in the supply chain. Product and production management, we have already discussed inventory risk, capacity risk, right? These are all internal to supply chain. And, external to supply chain risks we have already seen. So this is the internal to supply chain and external to supply chain. But now, we will come precisely to supply risk, right? Since we are talking about strategic sourcing, so we should also discuss, how we can categorize the supply risk from the supply chain. Can we take out the supply risk so that, we can focus more on supply side risk, right? But, for addressing, though our motive is like, in the domain of strategic sourcing to address supply risk, right? But we really need good framework, good understanding of, risk and risk management framework, so that we can apply to a more precise situation. You can see some reading materials which I've put up there with examples like, what are the different kind of supply risk under different categories which impacts, like, the supply chain or organizations in different manner. So when we talk about supply risk, right, let's see how we define it. Supply risk that adversely affects inward flow, inward flow of any type of resources, right? That's whatever we are getting from the upstream supply chain, inward flow of any type of resources to enable operations to take place, right? They are also called input risk, right? Muehlberg has defined it as a input risk also. But Citizen has given the transpiration of significant or disappointing failures with inbound goods and services, right? So this is more inclusive in terms of, like, for manufacturing and services. That's what we have been seeing. Even for service industry, like, all the input related, inbound related issues, like, which results in either failure or, one can say, adverse effect, on the supply side, we call them as supply risk. So supply risk fall under category like, internal to supply chain, towards supply side, or maybe external to firm, right? Like here, can we say that within supply chain, the supply side, the input side of the risk, like, which can be delays, it can be procurement, right? Or it can be external to supply chain, right? If some external factors, some disruptions happen to supply organization or to the suppliers, it would also result in risky situation, and it would impact, the buyer, or it would adversely impact the buyer too. That's why it is very important when we categorize the supply risk, right? We must consider the supply side risk, or you can say inward, inbound, input risk, as well as, external to supply chain, like, where those factors, those risks external to supply chain, which are impacting the supplier or which are impacting the buyer because of being having supplier as a global supplier. So this is how we define supply risk, and this is the categories, like, which we can focus on, right? So when we talk about delays, delays, what are the other sources, or we can say sub risks or subcategories of risk? So if the broad category is delay, what is the subcategories? There can be subcategory of poor quality product, right? For example, if supplier is supplying poor quality product, it actually hampers, it actually delays the production. Right now, this poor quality can be due to our immediate supplier, that is tier 1, or it can be due to tier 2 or maybe subsequent upstream supply chain that might be leading to this product, right? This delay risk, right? There can be, like, risk due to inflexibility, right? If supplier inflexibility, or, like, lack of agility, right? When supplier is not cater to changing demand, right? So that also leads to delays, this risk, like, being because of, like, inflexibility of supplier, that is a risk, like, which causes the buyer in the form of delays. There can be transportation mode. So now this works both way, right? When we talk about supply chain, our logistic service providers are also kind of suppliers, service providers, right? They are also kind of suppliers. So any risky situation or any adverse situation happening at transportation modes, for example, like, uh, there is a multimodal inefficiencies when the product is loaded on truck, has to go via rail, so that's where this multimodal will come. or via sea, whether the containers are lying at the port, whether they will get clearance, whether they will have available containers. That is more of a cross border material handling. But like after cross border, within a country there can be multimodal risks, right? So that all leads to delay, right? So one can subcategorize this broad category delay, right, when we talk about supply risk, right? The other broad category of supply risk can be procurement risk, like while acquiring, right? When we have this acquisition of product or service, what kind of risks, sub risks we can have? Supply price fluctuation, like we know that price fluctuations happen, like price changes happen. It can be due to the change in the cost of raw material. It can be like the commodities, the markets, the exchange markets, like there the commodities are changing, the prices of commodities are changing every day, right? There can be exchange rate risk, like today I have signed contract with the supplier, so I have signed the contract at some exchange rate dollar with this particular Indian rupee. Let's say if exchange is happening with US and India, like, but when I would make the payment, right, then this dollar value will change. Dollar may appreciate, dollar may depreciate, it can go other way around, then how to cope up this risk, because this risk would certainly lead to losses. It also result exchange rate risk, in which currency I need to pay, whether if I'm dealing with a US dollar in US supplier, do I need to pay in dollars, or do I need to pay in Indian currency, right? That also makes a lot of difference. So all these fluctuations leads, or I would say that this risky situation, it impacts the supply chain performance. Another is single sourcing, when the percentage of key component, or we can say the most valuable component, or most of the value is procured from a single source. Too much reliance on sole sourcing or too much reliance on single supplier, that also exposed to a risk. In case any disruption happened here, then the company would be like in a loss, right? So you will see another reading material here, which will help to with an example, which will help you to understand how such risk in reality has like resulted in adverse situation in a company, and what is the loss. No doubt we will also learn down the line how to mitigate such risk, how to manage such risk, okay? But before that, one should first be sensitized and exposed to different categories of risk, right? And the this external to supply chain we have already discussed. Once we will know this is the risk we have, we will try to assess the risk, right? So what do we mean by assess the risk? I really want to know which risk is either more probable to occur, right? Whether it would impact me high, low, right? So that I should divert my resources, like to the most risky event with higher impact. So this word most risky, higher impact, how would I arrive to this thing? This would cover under risk assessment, right? So now external to supply chain categories, natural disasters in supply region, right? That would definitely impact the buyer performance. Any labor dispute or strikes at supplier premises, right? That would also impact the supply chain. Strikes at logistics service providers, like we have seen in the past, like many ports, like they have resulted in they have faced like these strikes, which this global logistics provider, they do, that really impacts, delays the whole process. And even the credit rating, the supplier bankruptcy, one has to keep in this thing, like keep on check, or this try to accommodate this risk of supplier being bankrupt. Okay, so one has to keep evaluating the supplier based on their credit capability. So this is one example you can see here, natural disaster and fire, how it has impacted the supply chain and the uh, overall adverse impact on the performance of an organization and supply chain. So we have tried to provide a scheme of categorization of risk, importance of having some scheme of categorization, importance of categorizing the risk in general, and then we have seen how we can categorize supply chain, and then we have seen, like, how to focus on the categories of supply risk, right? And now we will move to our next step. Next step is the assessment of risk. So we will see in general what are the models available for risk assessment, and then we will see precise and specific cases in supply and supply chain, how we can assess the supply or supply chain risk in the next session.